Lecture 7 focuses on the different schedules of reinforcement used in operant conditioning. Video 1 will focus on continuous reinforcement, as well as fixed ratio, fixed interval, variable ratio, and variable interval reinforcement, while Video 2 will look at extinction, simple, and compound schedules of reinforcement. So to get started, we want to look at the most simple schedule of reinforcement, which is called continuous reinforcement. And this is very straightforward. Continuous reinforcement means that the behavior targeted, the behavior we're trying to condition, is reinforced every single time it occurs. For example, if I was trying to train my dog to sit, I would give him a treat every single time he successfully performed the behavior of sitting. We know that continuous reinforcement does produce the most rapid change in behavior. So that would be the quickest way to get my dog to learn how to sit, to reinforce him, to give him a treat after every single instance that he sat. However, this type of reinforcement is not common in nature. Most learning does not occur this way. If you think about my example, you will likely realize that dogs sit all the time. Sometimes not when I've just told them to, and oftentimes not when I'm around to give him a treat. Continuous reinforcement is also not possible in many lab-based situations. It is, however, great for shaping behaviors. Remember learning about shaping in the last unit? This is the most efficient way to shape a new behavior. The opposite of continuous reinforcement is an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. And these are much more common in nature and more often used in real-life situations. So instead of using continuous reinforcement, reinforcing after each behavior, we often use the intermittent schedule. And you've likely heard of these before. The four intermittent schedules of reinforcement operate on two different trajectories. The first one is time, or quantity. So the amount of time that's passed, or the number of behaviors that's passed. That is ratio and interval. Ratio means the number of behavior, or the quantity, and interval means that it's based off of the amount of time that has passed. The other trajectory that we want to look at is certainty, how certain we are that we know when the reinforcement is going to occur. And this refers to fixed and variable. We are certain because it is fixed, or we are uncertain because it is variable. So together, these two aspects of the schedule make up the four most common intermittent schedules of reinforcement. Before we get into those four specific types, I want to quickly give you some straightforward definitions of these four words that we're dealing with. Fixed means the time or number is always the same, while variable means that time or number changes after each reinforcement period. Ratio means that the reward is determined by the number of behaviors. Behavior is key there. While interval means the reward is determined by a period of time. These two are opposites, and these two are opposites. Fixed versus variable, ratio versus interval. So we want to start with fixed ratio schedule. What does that mean? A fixed ratio schedule means that the behavior being targeted is reinforced when it occurs a fixed number of times. Anyone who has ever been to a frozen yogurt shop has likely received a rewards card where, you get a punch or a sticker or a stamp every time you buy a thing of yogurt, and after every 6 or 10 visits, you get a free yogurt. That is a fixed ratio. You buy yogurt 6 times, and you get the reward of a free yogurt. The behavior is reinforced after it occurs a fixed number of times. The key here is that there is a consistent ratio of behavior to reward. You get one reward for every 6 behaviors. Every 3 times I work out, I get to go out to eat. That's another example of fixed ratio. Interestingly enough, we know that fixed ratio schedules often carry with them something we call the post-reinforcement pause. And this is the tendency to stop a behavior temporarily after it's reinforced, because we know that, one, I've just received my reward, and two, it's going to be a few behaviors before I receive that reward again. We have a tendency to stop doing that behavior pretty drastically or pretty dramatically right after we receive our reward. There are post-reinforcement pauses in other schedules of reinforcement, and we're going to look at that. But fixed ratio has the highest tendency of post-reinforcement pauses. And that just means, again, that we wait a while before continuing to perform that behavior. I'm not going to go back to for yogurt for a while because I just got my free yogurt. It's going to take me a while to build back up to 6 punches on my card, so we're going to take a break. This is an example of an FR2 schedule. And this notation, FR, means fixed ratio, where the 2 means or indicates the number of behaviors that have to occur before you get rewarded. For example, if a teacher rewards a student for correct answers to questions, but the student has to correctly answer a question twice, that would be an FR2 schedule that looked like this. The teacher asks a question, the child answers correctly, no reinforcement happens. The teacher asks a question the second time, the child answers a question the second time, and the child gets a gold star. They get reinforced after every 2 correct answers. Fixed ratio 2. You can pick any type or any number of fixed ratio. You can have a fixed ratio 10 where you're reinforced after every 10 behaviors, a fixed ratio 100 where you're reinforced after every 100 behaviors. And it would function exactly like this, just with more periods of non-reinforcement. Next, we want to look at variable ratio. Variable ratio means that the behavior is reinforced after an average number of behaviors, but not a set number. Meaning that the person or animal performing the behavior doesn't know how many behaviors they have to do before they are reinforced. The best example of variable ratio is playing a slot machine. Pulling the lever is the behavior that's being reinforced. You know you have to pull that lever a certain number of times before you're going to win money, but you don't know how many times you have to pull the lever. The interesting thing here is that while the reinforcement seems random, or it seems to occur after a random number of times, there is an average, meaning that the number of behaviors that you have to perform to receive the reinforcement is going to average to a specific number. We'll look at what that looks like in a visual depiction in just a second. So for example here, a VR10 schedule, variable ratio 10 schedule, reinforcement is going to occur an average of every 10 behaviors, but sometimes it will occur after 5 behaviors, sometimes it will occur after 20 behaviors. You never know how many are going to be needed. Variable ratio actually produces very steady performance or more of the behavior without that big post-reinforcement pause. Because after I've won that jackpot, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to have to pull it another 20 times. Maybe this time it's only going to take 1 or 2 pulls. So we have a tendency to continue with the behavior after reinforcement more so than with a fixed ratio schedule. This is also more common in nature. For example, if you imagine a cheetah hunting in the wild, sometimes it's going to successfully stalk and kill its prey, and sometimes it's not. It may not succeed the first or second or even the third time, but it's going to have an average. Say every 2 times it goes hunting, it's going to pay off. This variable ratio reinforces the cheetah's hunting. The cheetah does not know how many times it's going to have to go hunting in order to get fed, but it always averages. And that's why you're going to see that number in the VR notation, because just mathematically, there's always an average of the number of behaviors that have to occur in order to be reinforced. Here's an example of that. This is a variable ratio of VR2 schedule, and it might look like this. The teacher asks a question, the child answers correctly, and they're reinforced. The next 2 times the teacher asks a question and the child answers correctly, there's no reinforcement. After the 4th time, there is a reinforcement. After the 5th time, there's no reinforcement. After the 6th and 7th time, the behavior is reinforced, and so on and so forth. You'll notice that there's not a consistent number of behaviors that have to occur. That's the variable part here. But it does average to every 2 times. The next schedule we want to look at is a fixed interval schedule. And this is when you are reinforced after a fixed period of time. For example, say I have to clean my room every week. And if I clean my room every week, my mom takes me out for ice cream. I can clean my room anytime during that week, but I have to clean it at least once in order to get that reinforcement. And that reinforcement is not going to happen until the end of the week. The key here is that the behavior has to occur at least 1 time during the specified fixed time period. Another interesting note here is it doesn't matter how many times I clean my room, I'm still going to get the same amount of reinforcement. I could clean my room every day, but my mom only takes me out for ice cream once. Just like with fixed variable, we do see a post-reinforcement pause occur here as well. So I want you to keep in mind that whenever we have a fixed schedule, whether it be ratio or interval, that's always going to cause more of a post-reinforcement pause because we know it's going to be a while before that reinforcement is introduced again. One example I like to use here is baking bread. The bread is going to take a specific amount of time to cook. It does not matter how many times I open the oven to peek inside of it. As long as the bread is in the oven, it's going to cook at the set pace. So how is this different from fixed ratio? I want you to take a second and pause the video here and ask yourself this question. This is a good time to write out your own definition of fixed ratio and your own definition of fixed interval, focusing on how they're different from one another. So pause the video, take a second to do that, and when you're ready, hit play. Hopefully, your definition of fixed ratio and fixed interval focused on that shared fixed aspect, meaning that the either number of behavior or the amount of time is set. It doesn't change, we always know what it is. The difference here is that fixed ratio is based off of a number of behaviors, while fixed interval is based off of a period of time. The third schedule we want to look at is called variable interval. And this is when the behavior is reinforced after a time period, but that time period changes. It does not stay the same, it varies. My favorite example here, if you've ever waited in line to go on a roller coaster, gotten back off and gotten back in line to go on it again, you'll likely notice that the wait time is different. Every time you get in line to go on that roller coaster, there's a different wait time. Maybe it's 5 minutes the first time, you run back around, and now it's 15 minutes. That's variable interval. At the end of waiting, the behavior we're reinforcing here is waiting in line. You get to go on a super exciting roller coaster, but the amount of time you have to perform that waiting changes each time you get back in line. Variable interval also produces very high performance rates, but not as high as fixed ratio or variable ratio. I want to give you another opportunity to pause the video. Uh-oh. We are missing a slide here. Oh no, we are missing our variable ratio slide. I will post an additional lecture video covering specifically variable ratio. I'm so sorry about that. But before I get to that, this is a great opportunity for you to think ahead. You know the definition of variable interval. You know the definition of variable ratio. What do you think the definition of variable interval is? This will be a good time to click on that really short additional video I've posted after this one. Once you're done with that, come back and watch the end of this video. The last thing I want to focus on in this video is the post-reinforcement pause that I've mentioned across these different schedules. What you'll notice here is a visual depiction of how steep or how big the drop off and behavior performance is. And what I just want to kind of visually illustrate here is that when we are dealing with a fixed schedule, either fixed ratio or fixed interval, that is always going to produce a steeper post-reinforcement pause, meaning that when we know what the schedule is, we're going to stop performing the behavior as much right after we're reinforced. When it's variable, when we don't know, we're going to continue performing that behavior very consistently. Again, take a second, go back to watch the little supplemental video for this, and when you're done, you can move on to video 2, where we'll talk about extinction, simple schedules of reinforcement, and compound schedules.